Monologues. I am Dr. Ray Mitch, your host, and today is January 31st. Congratulations, you suffered through or survived the beginning of a new year, and now here we sit on the last day of the month, and it's been quite a ride, needless to say, with all the events that occur just within this last month is enough for a year, it would seem at times. So the other notable item with the podcast is that we are actually in our 51st episode, which if it were weekly, that would put us almost nearly at a year, which we're off because I crammed in a bunch of extra episodes at the front end, mostly because of need and wanting to talk about stuff that was going on in the classes I was teaching and things like that. So that's kind of a notable item, I suppose, on the radar. Tomorrow marks a brand new month, and I don't know that I would say I look forward to it, but I certainly am willing to walk into it like I have a choice. And so here we go. And if you are listening for the first time, just a little bit about the Psych Monologues and what you've dialed into or clicked on or whatever that might be. And the Psych Monologues is a podcast that actually is devoted to looking at our overall journey toward wholeness with ourselves and what that looks like and how we relate to ourselves. We're the only being in the universe that we have a relationship with ourselves. And so with ourselves, and then in our relationship with each other, and ultimately our relationship with God and what that actually looks like. I mean, the reality is when you start talking about God, everything changes, right? I mean, the idea of having a relationship with God either is galvanizing in either direction, whether it's a positive or negative. Whatever we find in God is usually what we bring with us. And the interesting thing about all that is that God doesn't really get to define himself. We define him for him and then relate to that as it is. So what I want to continue, and we're probably going to be in this 2 more weeks. I'm trying to speed up my time here so that we can get this thing done. It feels like it's dragging on. I don't know about you, but I begin to have a sense that it gets boring after a while. Keep kind of beating the bush around what it means to accept grace. That's unfortunate, but it's a reality. I think we always live with that in terms of the familiarity with the topic and what that involves. So we're in the middle of a series that I'm calling Accepting Grace. And of course, the big question here is, why is it so hard to accept grace? And then the second question is how? I mean, how do I go about accepting something, which sounds kind of like a passive process, if you will. Somebody gives me something and either I reject it or accept it. And there's something about grace that really rubs us the wrong way when you really get right down to it, because we can't really stop the person who's offering us grace. They're going to offer it to us. And that really clarifies and makes clear, which is redundant, I realize, but it makes clear either I'm going to accept it or reject it. And if I accept it, then what? And the funny thing about it is grace being what it is, doesn't come with strings attached. It's just being offered. That's it. And yet we say, all right, what do you want kind of approach. And if we were to embody grace, it would kind of cock its head to the side and say, huh? Why would... No, it doesn't make sense. I'm offering grace. So, and that same thing is true with the people around us, right? When they offer us grace, whether that's in their pursuit of a relationship or whether that's just being kind or offering a word of encouragement or whatever that would be, unsolicited, just voluntary, we accept it on the one hand, and then on the other, we end up indebting ourselves and saying, okay, I've got to do this back because now that somebody's offered me this, then there's some trade going on here. And see, that's our way to kind of dilute it. I mean, we reject it and accept it all at the same time. Because if I turn it into something that is reciprocal, then I can control how I accept it, and that way then I can keep it within the realm of what my control, like I said. So if I turn grace into a trade, then I can reciprocate and say there that the balance beams are even. Now we're good, and we can move on until the next time. And either you offer it or I offer it to you, and then we're back into the unbalanced beam of what you owe me and what you don't. On the other hand, in some respects, it would be far more honest just to say, no, don't do that. I don't want it, quite honestly. And that would probably be more honest than actually turning it into something that it is not. Fundamentally, it is not. It is not built on a trade. It is offered freely. That's the very nature of it. So that's why is it so hard? Why do a series like this and talk about this for as long as I am? Because I think ultimately it's the basis for all relationships. Is that grace, when it's embedded in a relationship, it invites growth for both people. And that's really the backdrop, I think, to this whole thing around grace. I mean, there are two different things that we can talk about. I'll probably talk about the other item at a later point in time, but that is that if I accept grace, then I also learn to live free. And that like I said, that's just a whole other Pandora's box of when you open it, then you need a bigger box to put it all back in. So that's where we're at, and we've gone through a number of different items when it comes to accepting grace, from turning it into a trade and a contract versus in terms of what I just said, or being uncomfortable and making it into something I know, or any number of things. And you can go back to the previous podcast to kind of get a look at it, how we handle our emotions. And the frame I've been using along the way with this is really the idea of moving from one country to another. Now, we have been dividing it up into the old country and the new. The old country is ultimately built on law, on conventions, on this is how we do things. And if you don't do it that way, then you suffer some consequences or punishment, if you want to use that phrase. But if we decide to move to the new country where grace abounds and love exists and trust is engaged, then we find ourselves really, really uncomfortable. I mean, let's face it. Living in a world of grace and trust and freedom and love and truth, living in that can be really, really uncomfortable. And that's why we're always using our little strategies to try to turn the new country into the old, so we know what we're doing. So what? So I don't make a mistake, because mistakes are fatal, which we talked a little bit about last time. So here we sit and here we stand, and So we've been using this metaphor of old country to new and moving from the old country and new. I talked about how the path between these two places is very, very well worn. And there are plenty of people, myself included at times, that would rather set up our bivouac in the middle of the place so we can go either way. And it's inconvenient, it's very uncomfortable, and it's basically a no man's land, although it seems to be populated by a lot of people. Because we really don't like the old country, but we're not so sure we like the new one either. And so we'll kind of beat our feet back and forth between the two countries, and based on our comfort level and our willingness to take risks and all that kind of stuff. So that, I think that more or less gets us caught up to date. We've got a few more items, a few more characteristics to compare between the old country and the new. And the first one that I want to talk about tonight is the nature of boundaries in the old country and the new country. Excuse me. And in the old country, boundaries are exceedingly porous. Okay, it's like a sieve. You pour water through it, and water goes all the way through into the glass underneath, or all over the table, or whichever you prefer. But porous boundaries are characteristic of the old country. In other words, not only am I responsible for myself, but I am also responsible for you. Now, what does this look like? So when I say something that is honest, or I say something, or I show some emotion, the first thing out of my mouth, or the first part of my calculation in my relationship with you, is what impact is it going to have on you that I am responsible for as well. So I may be responsible enough for myself to speak my mind, to say what's on my heart, to speak fully from my heart. But then I pull it back, because then if it has a negative impact on you, or it makes you upset or something like that, now I'm responsible for that. So what happens? Essentially what happens is I log that in my brain. I say, when I say these kinds of things, the person reacts, well, I'm sure not going to do that again. See, the nature of boundaries and porous boundaries, and oh, by the way, let me just make mention of this. I'm heavily indebted to all the work that John Townsend and Henry Cloud have done within this area of boundaries. They wrote the original book. Myself and two other friends wrote a supporting companion devotional for boundaries. And that oftentimes is what's the fuel behind so much of what I talk about. So not only what John and Henry talk about in their Boundaries book, which I think is fundamental to healthy relationships, but also some of the things that we explored in our devotional that is not even on the market anymore. So that's kind of how those things go. So being responsible for somebody else means that I'm not only responsible for me, but I'm also responsible for you and your emotional content and your emotional struggles and even your choices, which means then that if I'm responsible for me, that's pretty big. That's a pretty tall order in and of itself. But if I add to it that I am now responsible for you as well, then I'm how much of what I'm actually going to say is going to be honest? Because in a lot of cases, the more I know them to whatever degree they want to share themselves. I mean, really, and that's just a sidelight, okay? I'll come back to it here in a second. But the level of what I know of another person is fundamentally based on the level of which they know themselves, because they can't share what they don't know, okay? So if I'm responsible for me and I get to know you to the degree that you can share yourself, and I know this is probably going to be hard for you, then what will tend to happen is that I will tend to pull my punches. In other words, I won't go all the way through with what I have to say because I know it will impact you negatively. And really, when it comes right down to it, I don't want to deal with it. Now, I won't say it that way, but that's what it really amounts to, is not only do I not want to deal with that, but because of how much responsibility I feel for what's going on in you, that if you react negatively, now I need to do something about that. And see, what happens with being responsible for somebody else is I have all the responsibility and none of the power. None of the power to do anything about those emotions. The other person does, but I don't. But I'm responsible for it. And guess where that leads? To complete and utter frustration. So, and in relational terms, it leads oftentimes to resentment. So in the old country, everybody's responsible for everybody else. And so to what level can we actually be known, or to what level can we actually know somebody else, really? Because we're all responsible for one another. And that oftentimes is the culture in which we live. And in a lot of relationships, I think sometimes even the definition of intimacy is built on being responsible for the other person. Now, what's the alternative? The alternative is in the new country, it's being responsible to someone else, which frames the problem very, very differently, because ultimately my ability to allow my stuff to be my stuff and your stuff to be your stuff is built. It really provides the basis for intimacy, because I'm not busy trying to manage your stuff for you. That's your job. And I am also focused on managing my stuff, really highly clinical language here. I'm busy managing my stuff myself. And if I want to be honest, then that's what I bring forth, not out of fear as to what it will do to you, because that's your job, but out of an effort to heighten the intimacy we share, because we're sharing of our stuff. And the stuff, boy, here it comes. I'm repeating myself. But all the issues and thoughts and desires and emotions and everything that's going on inside of me, that's what I share. So being responsible to you is allowing you to handle the stuff, the nature of. I caught myself. The nature of it, the dynamics that are. I'm so stuck on that. The dynamics of stuff that's going on inside of you. I'm really sensitized to it now. And that's being responsible to you. And in a lot of ways, I'm giving you freedom. Now, it's not mine to give, I know. But in a lot of ways, quote unquote, giving you freedom is respecting your boundaries. In other words, the way that I've described it to my students, and I even described it to my kids as they were growing up, was I have my yard and I have a fence around my yard, and it demarcates that which I'm responsible for. And that fence has a gate in it, and I am the gatekeeper of what goes on in my yard. And somebody can come and knock on the gate, and I can say, come in, or I can say, nope, you're not coming in, but we can certainly talk to the fence. And it's not to create separation. It's to be clear about what is me and what is not me. And having conversations that way are far, far easier, and I might add healthier, because we're clear about what we're responsible for. So being responsible to somebody is an empowering thing to do for the other person. Now, what that means then is that if I want to help and I have not been invited into somebody's yard, then I might come to the fence and say, hey, do you want some help? And they can say, the other person can say, no, that's okay, I'm fine, which has all sorts of other things that go with it. But they say, I'm fine. And we can say, okay, cool. Let me know if anything comes up, or I can be of any assistance. Let me know. I'll be happy to come. It's on you to open the gate for me to come in, but I'm happy to help. And they say, great, thank you, see ya. And we take them at their word and we walk away. Because now that empowers the person. And see, the key to porous boundaries versus clear and gracious boundaries is words matter. And we take the person at their word. So if they say no, it means no. It's not if they say no, it means yes. Now please do something for me that I probably should be doing for myself, like asking for help. So porous boundaries are part of the old country. Clear and gracious boundaries are part of the new. And there is an immense amount of respect and dignity and empowerment in allowing others to choose to take care of themselves, including asking for help. It doesn't mean being an island. It does, as Simon and Garfunkel sang back in the 70s, I am an island, I am a rock. No, that's not that at all. But I am free to either ask for help or to reject help, and we take you at your word. Okay? So that's that. Porous boundaries, new old country, clear and gracious boundaries in the new. The second one I want to mention tonight is how in the old country, because of the very thing I just talked about with porous boundaries and all that, we end up trolling for evidence that would support our self-condemnation. because we're always looking for where we've done something wrong. Usually it's wrong because we haven't taken care of you. And in so doing, and even in the Christian culture, sometimes we get this notion that serving you means to denigrate me. Now, self-sacrifice and choosing others above yourself are embedded in the Christian way of life and the understanding, but I don't have to take it all the way to deprecating and denigrating myself. I can be on equal footing and still volitionally choose to help another person and, in a sense, deny myself. That's my choice. I can do it. I'm called to do it. We can often reset our efforts and understanding of the world by doing that. There is very much of a place like that. The thing I would point out to you is who would be the ultimate model of self-sacrifice and, in a sense, self-denial, and it would be Jesus, because he did just that. And yet he still maintained a sense of his own need, whether that's taking care of his own soul by retreating to a mountain to pray and to spend time in solitude, or to walk alone for a while, or any number of things like that we often see as a rejection of people, when in fact it's a refueling for people. And that's a fundamental piece of this idea. So in the old country, we're always looking for evidence that we've done something wrong. And then the next step beyond that is not only have we done something wrong, we're just wrong ourselves. Everything about us is wrong. There's nothing redeemable here. And it begins to pile on. So that drives as well the whole boundaries piece, because then I can be responsible for other people and find my worth and function and usefulness in other people, rather than having the boundaries to take care of my issues and my heart and all that goes on there, at the same time encouraging others to do the same. So self-condemnation is a way to change behavior. Unfortunately, all it does is entrenches behavior. Because self-condemnation doesn't change. It doesn't change anything, really. All it does is say, you will be what you've always been, and get used to it, and you'll just live in this state of discouragement. And ironically, that self-condemnation, that phrase I just said, comes from, it's not original to me. It's not original to me, but I'm quoting a phrase from Les Mis, because that's exactly what Joubert said of Jean Valjean, is you will be what you have always been. And that's the voice of condemnation, self-condemnation. And so learn to just live with it. It's not going to get any better. That's just the way things are. So c'est la vie. So goes life. The other side of the coin in the new country is pursuing intimacy in relationships, including self-revelation and inviting others to join in. And so what's this idea of pursuing intimacy? And actually, it fits right in with what I mentioned before, because I can't give away what I don't own. I can't give away what I don't know. I can't share information about myself if I have not explored that self. And that's one of those points where self-reflection is so vitally important, because the more I know of that, the more I have to share and thereby build intimacy. I had a good friend of mine many years ago when I first came to Colorado. I was working at a men's organization called Promise Keepers. And I don't know how we were on the topic of intimacy, but the way he defined intimacy is into me see. And so it is knowing myself well enough to give myself away. And that's what pursuing intimacy looks like in relationships. It includes self-reflection. It includes self-revelation. and it includes participating in our restoration. And so and by doing so, not because I'm saying you should too to somebody else, but I'm inviting them into that journey into intimacy. Not easy, far, far, far from easy. A couple of my classes that I teach at CCU both have groups in them, and a lot of students like to talk a big game about being known and vulnerability and transparency and authenticity and etc., but sit them in a group with people that they don't know, and it sure begins to look a little differently. Now, I will grant you, it's a lot easier to do that with people who know us and we know them. I grant you that. But if I'm going to be pursuing intimacy, where do I start? Do I start only with the people that I know and I can control maybe, or I can manage their perceptions because they're willing to participate with me on that, or what? And so pursuing intimacy in relationships through self-revelation and self-reflection, actually, those are reversed. I should do self-reflection, self-revelation, and then restoration. And each one of those are very much a part of the new country. That's why, and think about this, that's why the old country is so comfortable. Because I'm comfortable with self-condemning, self-punishment. Yeah, I'm getting what I deserve, all of those kinds. I'm comfortable with that perfectly. But when I go into the new country and people share of themselves, and I get uncomfortable because why? I contract myself to that way of doing things, and I'm scared spitless. And that's what makes it so uncomfortable. And I say, nice to know you. I'm tapping out. See y'all later. And I put on my track shoes and head for the old country. Because I'd rather have my known dragon than my unknown angel. And that's what the new country represents to most of us. So, food for thought tonight. There's lots to talk about in here, and there's lots to try to bring up for people that are just joining this conversation. But there are two different things and characteristics of old country and new, which we talked about: porous boundaries, responsible for others, versus being responsible to others, which is new country. And then the idea of collecting evidence for my own self-condemnation versus engaging or pursuing intimacy through self-reflection, self-revelation, and ultimate restoration in relationships. So there you have it. Have a good evening. That'll bring us to a close tonight. As always, I'd like to just do a few reminders at the end of each podcast. The first one is in terms of subscriptions and following the Psych Monologues on various social media platforms. If you'd like to subscribe, please go to my website. It's labeled A Dangerous Community, and it is at drmitch.com. And up in the right-hand corner, there's a subscription box, and whenever you subscribe there, you'll get everything that comes through that is new. We are busy developing, I think, a more user-friendly and informative website. I will have all of the announcements, but it's in the works, and we're working at it on a regular basis. Some of the social media platforms that we're on, that Psych Monologues is on, is Instagram. It's the Psych Monologues, all lowercase. Facebook, you can find me at ray.mitch. At LinkedIn, drmitch. And finally, that's it. I don't have it finally. So there's those social media platforms. Also, you can subscribe to the podcast. And if you're interested or you're familiar with Podbean, you can find me there at raymitch.podbean.com, or you can find the podcast at wherever you like to listen to podcasts, which is exciting and interesting. Well, not interesting, but certainly exciting, I think, for our access to more people that might be interested in what I'm talking about on each podcast. So we're available on Spotify, on Stitcher, on iTunes, on obviously Podbean, Amazon Music. We were just added to iHeart Media about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So wherever podcasts can be found, you can find the Psych Monologues there. if you find stuff that that I'm talking about and it strikes a chord and you can think of a friend that might be interested in subscribing, please pass it on. It's always fun to take note of the people that are participating in the audience or listening to some of my rantings, which apparently it looks and sounds that way to me at least. And then finally, one last thing, just a pitch for support and partnership. We have a CCU Silent Retreat scholarship fund that we are running right now through GoFundMe. It can be found on the website under the CCU tab and the drop down to Silent Retreats. And we're doing silent retreats for students at CCU. This is an opportunity to engage in the ancient disciplines of solitude and silence. It is a new experience for a lot of students, and so we need help in terms of building a fund that will allow them to go because it's not cheap, and we need to be able to provide them with a way to go and enjoy that. So that's it for tonight. I appreciate your time. I thank you so much for spending some time with me tonight as we talk about the old country and the new and accepting grace. Love ya. Later. Bye.